And now, part two of Richard Gordon's interview with Dan Glickman here on Unconventional Times. These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
Right. While we're talking about Congress, let me just ask you, because I think it's a fascinating political science conversation, but it's really a much more interesting constitutional issue. The relationship between the President of the United States and the Congress of the United States is in front of our eyes day by day morphing. There have been movements, as far as the president go, President Nixon way back in the 70s and how he took more power. And there's sort of been this ebb and flow. But what we're seeing in the last couple of months of the Trump administration is the executive branch really exerting itself over the other two branches. I mean, we could talk about Congress, but we could say the same thing about the judiciary to some degree. I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I mean, the president has wiped out agencies that were created by Congress, completely, like USAID. He's involved in tariffs. The Constitution is pretty clear that Congress has the power on the tariff issue. There's been a number of things like this where the executive branch is really reaching in and taking power away from Congress. As a 9-term congressman, I'm interested in your thoughts.
I agree totally with what you just said. That is, I agree that there has been an abdication of authority and exercise of power by the congressional. I think, but it's been slippery. It's been going on a long time, and it's been deliberate because Congress has delegated its power to the executive branch. Because over and over again, we've seen Congress not want to make tough decisions. The deficit, our budget issues are kind of a classic example of that. And I think it's unfortunate the Supreme Court, not too long ago, they gave the president immunity that we didn't know that he had, which may further exacerbate this trend that what you're talking about. The tariff issue is a classic example. I'm sitting here and thinking, how could a single man make these decisions to totally disrupt the economic order of the world? Doesn't make any sense. And so where is the Congress? Because you're right, the Constitution gives the power of tariffs and money raising to the Congress. But then the Congress years ago said, well, the president in emergency circumstances can do whatever he wants. That's basically what the law says. I mean, it's slightly tighter than that, but not much tighter. So a guy like Trump just took it and abused it. And to hell with Congress. It doesn't have any authority whatsoever. Now, Democratic congressmen have done variations on the theme, not just to this magnitude, but both. We've given the power to presidents of both parties, and we got to figure out how to take it back or how to rebalance it a bit. So I agree with your premise.
Who actually does that, though? I mean, is that something the speaker should be doing? Is that the majority? I mean, it's interesting that the speaker doesn't I can't see Tip O'Neill, for example, saying, oh, this is okay, don't worry about it. I would think he'd be yelling and screaming.
Well, again, Johnson and his Republican predecessors had 2 and 3 and 4 vote margin.
Yeah, good point.
It just makes it so impossible for these people. But I do think it's congressional and executive branch leadership. That's another factor that there's Jefferson once said, one man with courage makes a majority. And so courage is character and courage are such important parts of our political system. And most members of Congress are good character. They're not corrupt.
Sure.
But the system does not reward courage at all. There is you got to take some risks in life, not to tell you I was anything so great, but back in 94, I voted for a crime bill that had the assault weapons ban. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now my state has got about 600,000 NRA members, and I knew there was a chance I would lose, but I thought it was the right thing to do. I voted for it. I lost. Okay. Life turned out just fine for me. So I tell a lot of these people, I said, don't be so damn afraid of stepping on your own shadow. Sometimes it's okay to take a risk and you lose. And that factor is not there very much anymore. Neither party nor individual members will take those risks.
It's interesting. I was going to ask you this at the very end, but I'm going to move it up because you brought it up. For the last 30 years, I have asked politicians the same question because it fascinates me. And you just raised it. What's so bad about losing?
Yeah.
So you just said that you had a view on assault weapons and that other people had a different view. And you went to the public and you also raised this, I remember your race. I remember how abortion played in your race.
Abortion also, yes.
And you took a position, you took a stance, your opponent took a different stance, you raised it with the public, and the public came back and said,
Goodbye. Right.
right, it's bad when hundreds of thousands of people say, Congressman, it's time to get a new job. But let's get back to my question. I ask politicians this all the time. What's wrong with losing? Why isn't it more important to take a position, to hold a position, I mean, why are you there anyway if it's not to do this? So I'm just curious, as someone, unfortunately, who has lost
Yeah.
so bad.
Well, first of all, it's an excellent question. And I'm sure that others will have a different point of view. It's two things. Edmund Burke said, what do you do when you become an elected official? You do what you think is right, and your constituents will kind of go along because that's what the system's about. But others say, no, 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 no. That defies the laws of gravity. That is, you got to do what your constituents want because that's the reason you're sent up there. As to, you got to represent them the best that you can and use your tools and your brain power to do what's right. So what ends up is you got to do both. And you got to show some courage, but sometimes, listen, I made a lot of votes that I thought, no, I'm not so sure this is the right thing. I tried not to do it on moral decisions, but if I felt the constituents took a strong position one way, I would normally vote with them. That's the way you do things. And so, but so that's okay. You can play it both ways. You do what you think is right as the important issues. I remember when Howard Baker voted for the Panama Canal to transfer to Panama, and boy, his constituents were like 10-1 against him, and he just said, "Look, this is the right thing to do, and this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do it. I vote with you on most things. This is the one I'm not with you with," and they accepted what he said. Sometimes they don't, and so. Here's the thing, however, is that the job is enticing. Being a congressman or, having staff, you were a staff person, having
It was.
staff do a lot of the work for you, taking care of you. That's a really, it's a fun job. Plus, it's a great job. You don't want to give it up voluntarily, but it's not meant to be the same kind of job as a long-term employment for a company or other lines of work. It's meant to be temporary, to be honest with you.
What I hear from a lot of people who I speak with, and I ask this question too, and I literally have been asking this, it's probably about 30 years. I frequently get, do you understand what would happen if I'm not there? I mean, do you understand? And sometimes they go through issues, for example, let's just stay with abortion. I voted pro-choice 75% of the time. If I'm not there, the guy who's going to come in after me will vote pro-choice 0% of the time.
Yeah.
And they could go through issues like that. But there's a sense of my importance. I need to be here. It's important for the country that I am here. And I think you said enticing. I think part of this is it is enticing. And I think you might get a person may get a sense that they are so critical to it, that the world won't continue, the democracy will not continue unless they're there.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. I think some of it is that it's the best job that a lot of these people will ever have.
Sure.
And while doesn't pay a lot of money, I mean, it's like, I think the salary is $175,000 a year. It's more than a lot of them would make on their own. And you get all this support system as well, And so I think it becomes a comfortable job for a lot of people. But that's why competitive elections are important too,
Right, right. Before we get off of Congress, you also, amongst the many things you have done in your life, you were the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, which is so critically important and a great honor to do it, but you got to see so much. One of the concerns a lot of people have is what's happening with the intelligence community. A lot of the people from the National Security Administration, the NSA, have been fired. Generals have been fired for saying the wrong thing. I think I read this morning that the head of the Greenland military base was fired. There seems to be something going on with the security, national security apparatus of the United States. As the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, I'd like you to talk about what this means for the public, what this means for the country and our security.
Well, first of all, I was chairman at the time that we didn't have all the high level crisis that we had right now. We had other kinds of crises, but I found a couple of things. Number one is that the Intel committees in the House and the Senate were largely bipartisan, and I worked with my ranking member as an equal, and that was really important. Second of all, the talent in the intelligence community, the CIA, NSA, some of the best I ever saw in government. And I learned to respect these people. I liked them. We differed with them when they were wrong, but they performed this extremely important function. But it's a symbol of other things. For example, the firing of the head of the NSA and the number two at the National Security Agency and the kind of thing you're just talking about, demeans this value that we put on national security in this country. And it's really a very serious problem. And the fact that they picked the Secretary of Defense, I'm thinking about who's been Secretary of Defense before. Bob Gates, Leon Panetta, Colin Powell, it's just like bipartisan, exceptionally qualified people. Some of them may have been more conservative and more liberal, but their first duty was to protect the country. And you don't get that feeling anymore.
Right. It seems to be protect the boss.
Protect the boss and reinforce the boss, and a lot of it is Trump. I'm not. Let's be honest about it. A lot of it is. I wouldn't say that's been going on forever and ever. I don't think it has been. I think that it's been made much worse during the Trump years.
How important is it to have diversity of opinion? I'm not even going to go into DEI at this moment, but diversity of opinion. We read stories about the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, and one of the things that perhaps saved the world is that President Kennedy was getting different points of view about what to do. And I'm just interested in the security world, how important that is that the President of the United States does get different points of view of what he should do, he or she, if we get to that.
If you read Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, you realize the example, of course, was Lincoln brought people together who hated each other's guts.
Right.
Well, in many cases, were on the cabinet, but gave him a diverse viewpoint about. She argues it was one of the reasons that Lincoln did as good as he did, and other presidents. Reagan had, in the national security arena, Reagan had very good people. And of course, Franklin Roosevelt did too. And other presidents have done it. So it's really important that we recognize that you can't play around with national security. You have to have effective operators with good judgment. And the president needs also, it's very difficult. It's easy to be obsequious to the president. I myself saw during the Clinton years how people around me, maybe I was the same way. I don't know. Would say they'd argue one way privately, and we'd go into a cabinet meeting and say, "Oh, you're so wonderful, Mr. President. This is the right thing to do, Mr. President." So part of this is probably the natural phenomenon that takes place. But good presidents want diverse opinions. They want to hear that they want to make the right choice. I really do think that. But you don't get that without. But you don't get that without diverse opinions. Let me tell you just one quick story.
Sure, please.
So when I was on the Agriculture Committee in Congress, again, a long time ago, there was not one African American member on that committee while I was on. So then I went to the Department of Agriculture when I was appointed secretary, and I walk into the building, and there are 250 black farmers right in front picketing, talking about discrimination against black farmers over the years in agriculture. And so I walked in, I was nonplussed. I was dumbfounded. Where did this come from? And anyway, it turned out we had this massive problem involving discrimination against black farmers over the last 5, 6, 7 decades,
Oh,
mostly in the South. And it had to do with the structure of farm programs, and there weren't any African Americans administering the farm programs. But the fact that I was on the agriculture committee all those years, not one African American farm member, not one hearing on the issues. It demonstrated to me how important diversity is in terms of decision making. Because so I got to the department, I did my best, I learned, I was in confrontation after confrontation, and but it was an example of why a leader needs diverse opinions coming in. I'm not even talking about, as you said, DEI. That's a separate issue.
you succeeded a black Secretary of
Yes.
Agriculture who was a member of Congress, right?
He
My guess,
was.
you too?
He was, and he was there for a couple of years
Right.
while I was there. He had a problem. He had to resign.
I remember.
So I got the job as a result of his resignation.
Gotcha. You mentioned Secretary of Agriculture a few times. What would you say your greatest accomplishment was? When you look back, what is the thing that you're proudest of?
My guess, I mean, there are a lot of things. Food safety was one thing.
Right.
So we significantly, excuse the language, beefed up our food safety operations, and and organic food. We created the organic food movement in this country. We provided the infrastructure to have organic products. But I think the best thing to say is I left, I think, with pretty good respect by the farmers and ranchers of this country. Here I was, this urban Jewish guy, became Secretary of Agriculture. I'm sure a lot of these people had never seen a Jewish person in their life. And
Right.
I'm a pretty good politician, and I worked it pretty well. And after it was over, I think that they liked me and they thought I did a good job and didn't create any I wasn't corrupt, the best of my knowledge, and so the trust was there. And I think that's probably I fulfilled my duty to try to serve honorably, I guess, and that's my biggest accomplishment.
Which I think is a tremendous accomplishment, especially in today's world. There's no way we're going to continue this conversation without you talking about being the designated survivor, because I thought that was a hysterical part of your book also. And I think, for most of us, first of all, a lot of us only know about it because we watched the TV show, but a lot of the rest of us obviously understand what it is and what it means. How does one become the designated survivor? How were you chosen to do that? And you've got to tell the story about when you were next in line to be president of the United States.
Well, first of all, there's always been this now it's changed a lot in recent years. It's a lot more rigorous. But when I was there, it was part of they'd pick somebody in the cabinet to be the odd person out.
And who picks it?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Probably the chief of staff. The president would get into this. So this was January of 1977, and I had been in the cabinet for a year and a half, and State of the Union's coming up. So this is people watch the old TV show with Kiefer Sutherland called Designated Survivor, and he was the HUD secretary who was going to be fired the next day, and then
Right.
there was a massive terrorist attack the night
And you
before.
weren't going to be fired the next day,
No,
right?
I don't think so. But anyway, so somebody came in and said, "Okay, State of the Union, Glickman, you're it. You're the designated survivor. You got to leave Washington for the night and go somewhere, and we'll take you in a plane." They didn't give me a lot of advice. They gave me a little card, a FEMA card, which I was supposed to break in half and had instructions in it. But the best that I can recall, but I didn't have to do that. So they called my chief of staff, they being the White House, the designated survivor. I need to go somewhere to leave town for the day. And now I think some members stayed in Washington, but they did not want me to do that, some former designated survivor. So I went to visit New York, visit my daughter who lived in Manhattan, lower Manhattan. So we flew up at in the military airplane, and I had best that I recall, I had a doctor and I had a military guy there with a briefcase. I never looked inside of it. Didn't get a lot of explanation about what to do if this was going to happen. And we got to LaGuardia Airport, and we had a 3 or 4 car motorcade. And so I'm going to my daughter's apartment. and she lived down near Union Square downtown.
Uh-huh.
And so we walk in, and nobody in her building spoke English. It was all Spanish speaking, and so we walk in, me and there were some New York City police officers there too. And so the place had maybe 15 or 18 law enforcement people, and all I could hear was the employees of the building were murmuring, "Inmigración, inmigración."
Wow.
And I said, "No immigration, no immigration. Don't worry, don't worry." So I went up. It shows you how haphazard. I went up to my daughter's apartment. We watched Clinton give his speech. He tended to talk forever. So a
Of
speech that was
course.
supposed to last 45 minutes, that lasted an hour and 45 minutes. Then after it's over, the Secret Service who were with me said, "Okay, Mr. Glickman, the mission's over. It's time to go back." And I said, "No, I think I'll stay here." And they said, "Okay, but we're leaving you. We don't have security anymore." And I said, "Fine." So I took my daughter, it was about 10:30 at night, took my daughter to dinner at a Japanese restaurant. We come out about midnight, a massive sleet storm. It was the kind of sleet that would hit you on the face and would burn kind of. And
Yeah.
so, and this was before Uber or Lyft. And we called a cab, and the lines were so busy that the cab didn't answer. So we walked 12 blocks back to her apartment, she and I alone. And she said to me, she says, "Dad, you were a few hours ago the most powerful man on the face of the earth, and isn't it funny you can't even get a cab right now?" And so I tell that story to make people know that you can be up one day, you can be down the next day, and it's how you handle those situations are so critical. So it's
That's
great.
so funny. Did you think about what you would do if, God forbid, you
Yeah,
became
yeah.
the
I was
president?
my all my wife could say to me was, "Good luck, good luck, good luck." I don't think she thought I would be a good president, but no, I thought about some of the cabinet people that I'd like to see replaced, but I didn't know. And then I saw Clinton afterwards. He says, "How'd you like being president?" And I said, "I think you're a more natural fit than I am." That's all I.
That's funny. That's great. Um, so you get out of Congress, you get out of the government. You ran the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. Uh, Just for quickly, so much turmoil going on today at universities, well, at Harvard also. The president has cut millions and millions of dollars to Columbia, to Cornell, to other schools. Seems to have a thing against the Ivies, not named Penn. Um, just interested your point. You have just a unique positioning. I mean, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, and I went to Michigan, and they've had some issues too, but
Yes,
their
yes,
their president seems to have done a better job than some of these university executives that seem to be rather tone deaf, because some have been able to deal with both the problems with unruly demonstrations as well as dealing with protecting free speech, which is really, difficult to see how. I mean, the administration is basically attacking people for what they believe and what they say, as opposed to what they do, which what they do is a different issue than what they think or what they say. But it is a much different world. And again, it requires just exceptional leadership at the university level to be able to how to handle your student audience and handle these external stakeholders like your government and funders as well. And some have done a good job and some have done a bad job. But
so many
bad,
different constituencies,
pardon?
so many different
So
constituencies.
many different constituencies, but those bad leadership tends to produce the bad results, and that's true in any line of work. But it's true at the university level. It's true at the government level as well.
Interesting. One last job, Motion Picture Association.
Yeah.
What made you do that? It's such a departure from all the other things you've done in your career and your life. I'm just curious, what brought you there?
Well, so I just tell you what happened. So I was at the Institute of Politics
Right.
and making about the same salary that I made when I was in Congress.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it's like I wasn't starving to death, but I wasn't living in wealth at all.
Surely.
And so I had served on the House Judiciary Committee, which when I was in Congress, which had jurisdiction over intellectual property rights and film piracy. And I knew the then head of the MPAA, his name was Jack Valenti,
Of
and he had
course.
been
Who was
there
there forever?
for years. He worked for President Johnson. He was there. And so he decided to retire. And he actually called me up and he said, "Would I be interested in the job?" And I I said, I don't know much about it. I know a little bit about intellectual property rights. My son was actually in the business,
Uh,
but he was like a lower level. He'd worked for a company called Caravan Pictures, which became Spyglass Entertainment. So anyway, and my wife had been head of the Congressional Arts Caucus, which was one of the caucuses on the Hill. So I'm familiar kind of generically with it. And so they offered me the job, and the salary was significantly more than I was making at the Harvard. And I decided, well, you know what? My kids live out in Los Angeles, and this, a great opportunity for me. And so, I took the job, and I had it for about 6.5, 7 years, and it was a lot of fun, lot, and entertainment is such an important part of the soul and brand of America. It's funny. I've participated in three of the biggest export industries in America in my life. When I was in Kansas, I was the aviation industry. So Boeing had a plant, had 45,000 workers in Wichita. Beach, Cessna, Learjet, all in Wichita. And of course, agriculture was part of my life. And then
right.
entertainment. So entertainment and agriculture and airplanes were then the three largest parts of our export markets. And I was able to participate in all of them, and they all gave me kind of a good feeling about what this country was all about.
Well, it must have been a fun job. I mean, I guess all of us look at that as the people you must have met, the things you must have done. It was probably very interesting.
I'll never, kind of. So I'll never forget, I saw Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General of the United States at the time, and he says to me, "You have the greatest job in the world." And I looked up and I said, "I work for seven Richard Nixons. They each are the studio executives." And I said, and they each are kind of secretly hoping that maybe not so secretly, that their competitors' business product will fail the next weekend. So I said, it's not the greatest, not the easiest job in the world. But listen, I've met a lot of brilliant, interesting people. One guy is still there, Bob Iger, who's the president of Disney, who's one of my bosses that I remain close with, and he's an exceptionally talented leader. In fact, I told him he ought to run for president. He said he couldn't get elected, but I said, well, you never know. He didn't take me up on that. But anyway, it was very interesting, and I got to do all the ratings of movies. So when you saw PG-13 and R, and
That was you?
that was me. Now I had a team that did most of that, but
Sure.
but that was fun. For example, a different rating, like if you rated something R as opposed to PG-13, could be $100 million different dollars difference in box office. So
Because of who could attend.
who could attend? So there's a lot of power in the job as well.
So people didn't throw films at you when they were mad at
No,
you.
no. In fact, I'll never forget when I was at the MPAA, one of the Republicans who was most hostile against Democrats called me once and he said, "Could I get a something?" He wanted something from one of the companies, and I said, "I thought you hated us." He said, "No, I don't hate the movies. I don't hate you. I just hate liberals."
Right.
And
Right.
so I said, "Okay, it's fine. I got him whatever he wanted."
That's great. Before we wrap up, I just want to talk about politics a little bit. I mean, you come from Wichita, uh, elected you to the Congress 9 times, which is quite a lot. But since you left office, you are the last Democrat to be elected in that district. Kansas has changed from being, having a history of progressivism, old world progressivism, not the way it's used today, but the old world type of progressives. You have a Democratic governor, but you have almost all Republicans in Kansas. But what I'm interested in chatting with you about a little bit is what has changed? Why could Dan Glickman get elected 9 times and no Democrat could get elected in that district today? I looked I don't mean to go on my question, but I looked quickly and the incumbent congressman wins overwhelmingly. Donald Trump 3 times, his lowest number was 59%. The others are in the 60s. What has changed?
And it's a great question, Richard. And of course, it's not just in Kansas, it's all through the heartland. You look at North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa. These states used to have either majority Democrats in Congress or a healthy percentage. They're 100% red now. Oklahoma, 100% red. When I was in Congress, there was a majority of Democrats in Oklahoma as Oklahoma congressmen. Iowa, 100% red. Iowa, the home of, all these caucuses and everything else. So it's changed in a lot of places, not just Kansas. Now, why did it change? Well, I have my own theories about it. One is that I think the cultural issues have really impacted voters. And so I'm not going to, I tend to be on the liberal side of most of these issues, but I must tell you that when it comes to abortion and guns was a huge factor, firearms. And so there's a chasm between the coastal people and those in the heartland on a lot of these issues. I think it had a lot to do with my loss and the losses of people all throughout the heartland are those cultural issues. And there are a lot of other reasons, lack of trust in government and everything else. But yeah, when you look at, I mentioned in the beginning, these votes in rural county Kansas, 6-1, 7-1, 10-1 Republicans. And then same things happen on the other side in a lot of the coastal areas where it's 5-1, 6-1 Democrats as well. I just think we've seen a separation occur, a chasm that's deeper than just political partisanship. I think it has to do with lack of trust in government, and we talked about money in politics, lack of civic education. It's not as bad on the state level as it is on the federal level. Like you're saying, in Kansas, we have a Democratic governor. We've had a history of Democratic governors in Kansas. Just can't get a lot elected to the Congress. We're the longest running state in America that has not elected a Democratic senator. 1930 was the last time we elected a Democratic senator in Kansas. Idaho, Utah have elected Democratic senators, not Kansas.
So why is that? I've always been fascinated by this. If you look at this, is a little bit off topic for us, but if you look at some major gubernatorial leaders in this country who then turned around and tried to run for Senate unsuccessfully, Bredesen in Tennessee, Bai in Indiana, Steve Bullock in Montana, very successful governors, failed substantially in all three of those elections. Why?
Well, I tell you what, I think on a gubernatorial race, it's a lot less ideological. So it's a lot more infrastructure, streets, roads, law enforcement, and when you get into the federal system, it just becomes a lot more cultural, divisive. Issues like abortion have a lot more play, and governors tend to know, most governors know that they have to be in the middle. The middle is when there's this old expression. Jim Hightower was the agriculture commissioner of Texas, and he once said the only good thing in the middle of the road is a yellow stripe and a dead armadillo. And I would say, yeah, and me and about everybody who wants to make the country work, or kind of in the middle. And so governors know how to do that. But once they get into the Senate world, their personalities and their previous experience become less important. And so that's the best answer I can give you.
So how do Democrats come back? How do they bridge this gap, this chasm that you were just talking about? How do they come back?
I think part of it is just being there. Self-deprecating humor helps. They got to like you, first of all. Got to like you because before they can invite you into their house, before they'll open the door to you. Focusing on those economic issues and not on the cultural issues. I mean, I'm not saying that you should give up your views on abortion or guns. I'm just saying they shouldn't be the prime place where politics exists, because most people don't want to vote on those kind of issues. And I'll tell you an interesting story I had. And I'm pro-choice and voted for the assault weapons ban. I was in a taxi about 3 weeks ago, and there was an African-American cab driver who was driving me, and we're talking about politics. And he was about my age, which is ancient. It's become. And so I asked him who he voted for, and he said Trump. And, the fact that he was African-American, it surprised me, but I shouldn't necessarily think that. I said, why? He said, there are a couple of reasons. He said he did better economically, when Trump was president first time. Okay. Whether he did or not, that's what he felt.
Sure.
The second thing he says, the only message I got out of the Democratic Party was women's reproductive rights.
Right.
He said, that may be important to some people, doesn't hit me at all. he said, I wanted people to talk about how I'm going to maintain my job and how I was going to, be economically survivable, so to speak, and how my grandchildren are going to go to college and that kind of stuff. And that really struck me that Democrats have to speak to that. And those Democrats that have been more successful than others. And it's I think why Bill Clinton was a successful president. He got that. He
Right.
understood that in his gut, so to speak. So that would be the best answer I could give you is that
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer, and I appreciate it. I think the Democratic Party could probably learn a lot from that. I probably should have asked you this as my first question, but I'm going to ask you this as my last question. What a career. You have given so much of your life to service to this country. What drove you to do it? Like, what made you one day the child of, people who are small business owners in Wichita? Why? Why did you go to law school and then go down this track? You could have been
well,
a very successful lawyer.
yeah, it's a couple things. One is I tell people I was a middle child and I had two siblings that drove my parents crazy, and I escaped by going into politics. So that's the psychological reason for it, I guess. But I was always kind of interested. And so I did yard signs for elected officials back when I was in high school. My parents were not very actively involved in politics. They were Republican in name only, but they were liberal. They were just in Kansas to vote in the primaries back then. You kind of had to stick to the Republican side of the picture. And I just think I was naturally a problem solver. I just felt like, and I was on the school board in Wichita, I remember, and I took great comfort out of working things out, so to speak. So I think that was part of it as well. And I probably would have done something similar with my life if it weren't politics, whether it's academia or someplace else. I think there is a role for people who want to work things out rather than who just kind of want to scream and create controversy.
Well, what a career. You've done amazing things and miles to go before your sleep. So there's a lot more to do. And listen, I just really want to thank you for taking the time. You've been incredibly generous with your time. And I just want you to know how much I personally appreciate it. I've enjoyed just chatting with you. It's been fun for me. But listen, thank you so much. Thank you for this. Thank you for your service to the country. I really appreciate it. And as I tell my guests, uh, Dan, stay unconventional.
All right. And you're a great moderator too. So it's easy
Well,
to respond with the questions being asked like you've done it.
Well, you're very kind. I mean, because it's fun, it's just like chatting over a cup of coffee with you. So
I forgot. I know this man. Who did you work for? Where were you on the Hill though?
oh, I was going to tell you that. Bob Traxler.
Oh yeah, no, no, no. I mean, because Michigan, and I went to school in Ann Arbor, so I
Right.
I knew him. Was he from Flint or was he from
You're close. I can still do it. He was
Saginaw? Saginaw. Was he from
Bay
Saginaw?
City, Bay
Bay
City
City.
and
Okay.
Saginaw. Yeah, his district was right
Yeah,
here in
yeah, right.
Michigan,
Yeah.
as they say up there. But yeah, I worked for Bob Traxler, which was great. Bingo Bob, as his nickname was. He had two extremely famous things about him. One was he brought the bingo industry to Michigan. He passed the legislation to let that happen. And two, in 1974, Richard Nixon, was at his lowest point, and there was all these special elections for Congress, and Nixon kept losing them. And he finally said, "Okay, that's it. Eighth District of Michigan. I'm going to campaign personally. I'm going in there, and it's going to be a campaign about me." And Traxler won.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I
He
worked
was
for.
an appropriator too.
He
Did you
was on
say?
the Appropriations Committee. You
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
very
yeah.
good
No,
memory.
that was those were the days where the real power was in the appropriators, without question.
Wasn't it called the Convention of Cardinals,
Yeah,
or it was
the chairs of each one of these subcommittees, and he had one of the subcommittees, I think.
HUD?
Yeah, that was it. And so, yeah, I knew him because of the appropriations, and then I also
Sure.
knew him because of all my family lived in Northwest Detroit, wrote my wife's family.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
so anyway, yeah, that's right. He was he was one of those very important institutional players that
Right.
not sure we had. I think we have more in the Senate now than we do in the House, but
And very moderate, very
very
moderate.
moderate. Yeah,
And also on the abortion issue,
he was slightly more conservative.
he voted for the Hyde Amendment.
Yeah,
So it was it was an interesting balance about the things he cared about and was interested in. But I think everyone should work on the Hill.
Yeah, no,
Son
no,
spent 3 years on the Hill.
yeah,
So,
no, and of course the Dingell influence was just remarkable during all that time period. And
so one of my great memories of that period, I forgot what the vote was, but I remember sitting in the gallery and they kept the vote open. And John Dingell, talk about a giant of a man in every regard. I mean,
right.
politically, physically, and he gets like the entire Michigan delegation on the corner of the floor and he puts his arms around them. And I'm sure he told them exactly how to vote. And and you could just see they all went into the well and
So,
voted.
so this is, I just tell you an anecdote, and this probably isn't for the podcast, whatever you do. But so anyway, there was a vote on an environmental issue, it's consumer right to know. It had to do with there are chemicals around the area, whether you'd have to tell the public. And John tended to be more conservative on these issues, Dingell, and so he worked this deal out with the Republicans in the bill, and they went to the floor, and there was an amendment, the Sikorsky amendment. Jerry Sikorsky was in,
Uh-huh.
and it was a member to give consumers much more information what it was. And I had a friend whose daughter had just died of cancer, and they had a swimming pool, and he was convinced it was the chemicals that caused her cancer, whatever. So I voted against Dingell on this key amendment, and the Dingell amendment lost by one vote.
Oh my.
Remember, 195 to 194. Okay. And I had told Dingell I was going to vote with him. And so afterwards, I went up to him and I said, John, I'm I'm sorry I voted against you. He said, I saw, I know. And then my heart started to beat like crazy because, and then I started to explain the reason why, which was the worst thing to do. And I told him he had this friend who died of cancer, and I had this. And so what I was inferentially telling him was is that he was causing cancer by this amendment.
Right.
And so he said, I don't want to hear your rationale. He said, in just this cold tone, he says, you gave me your word and you broke your word.
Oh
And
my.
so I thought to myself, I'm a dead man. And we became kind of friends with him. And it took me about 6 months, but then I came back to his office and we talked, and he finally said, I forgive you. He said, everybody makes a mistake once in a while. I never did that again. If I was going to vote against him, I told him way before. He said, that's all I want. He said, I don't care how you vote. I just don't want you to mislead me.
Right. Right. Wow, what a great story. What a great story. Still honor in Congress, right? Back then?
Yeah, and he was right. It was another thing I learned. You don't burn bridges, but you're honest with it's people around you if you can be, and people will forgive you for almost about anything, but they won't forgive you about breaking your word. That's the thing that,
So true. I
so
have this theory, which you brought this up many times in our conversation earlier. I have this theory that the public will forgive you for almost anything if they like you.
yeah,
If they like you and you don't break your word. And
yeah,
I've seen many politicians lose because they do the right thing, but they're not personally popular. And
yeah.
one of the great examples, you might have served with Jim Florio, I think, at the beginning of your.
I did, but I never knew him very well at all. So
So when he was governor of New Jersey, he wanted to equalize the schools because the schools in New Jersey are all paid for by property taxes. Well, so if you live in a wealthy community, the property taxes are based on wealthy people paying taxes and it goes to their schools. And he wanted to equalize this out. People really didn't like it. And he put taxes on a bunch of things. He put taxes on toilet paper. You talk about you getting hit with stuff. They used to throw toilet paper at him, you know? And he lost a very close election to Christie Todd Whitman. And I am convinced that's just one example. If he was personally popular, as a person, if people liked him more as a person, he would have pulled it out. And
and
I
and,
that's a
and I do
big part
remember
of it.
he was not a warm fuzzy guy. Uh,
No,
it's I've got this.
courageous. This goes to your courageous point.
There's this guy in Congress, Billy Long. I don't know if you know him. He retired last time.
Louisiana?
No, he's from Missouri. He's Trump's nominee to head the IRS.
Oh, got it. Billy
And
Townsend, I was thinking of. I'm sorry.
Billy Long, big heavy guy, and he was a former auctioneer. And we became friends, and total right winger. Wonderful guy, though. Just the nicest person you ever met in your life. Because of that, I remember just over and over again, people would give him the benefit of the doubt because they liked him, even though they
So nice. Yeah,
every.
that's great. Well, look, again, thank you so much
You're
for doing
welcome.
this.
Enjoyed it.
And when I said stay unconventional, I know you will.
Yeah,
So
right.
just
Okay.
just give me one more second. Anyway, thank you to our guest today, Dan Glickman, who's had an amazing career and has done so many different things. But one of the things I think that really came out today is that we don't have to be in this contentious time, that there's ways to work together. There's ways people could talk with each other and we could compromise and come to solutions that make sense. And in a world that's so topsy-turvy, where it seems easy to just argue with people and rip people down, maybe it's time we start thinking about how we could work together, talk together, be together, compromise on things. And that would make the country better, and I think our world better. So listen, thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. You could hear us on Spotify and Apple and any other platforms, and you can also watch us on YouTube. I had a great time today. I hope you did too. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.